Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Sam Quinones' nonfiction work, Dreamland. Because it is a nonfiction review, it's going to be a little bit different than my normal fiction reviews. I'll start off by talking about the author. Then I'll go into what the book is about, some takeaways from the book, who I would recommend the book to, and we'll finish off by talking about what I'll be reading for next time. So Sam Quinones, the author of this work, is best known for his journalism. He's a former journalist working in Los Angeles as well as in Mexico. This is probably his best known work. What this is, Dreamland, is about the opioid addiction. What is unique about it, I think, is it kind of not only focuses on the opioid addiction crisis starting in about the year 2000 roughly until about today, really, so the last 20 years or so, but it also goes into a history of the doctor's relationship to pain management in the United States, starting back in, I think, morphine was introduced in the early 1900s till today, and kind of that sea change of ideas. Back then, pain was not really looked as something that was vital to a person's well-being, like other vital signs, and kind of through not machinations, but through a series of events and kind of historical changes, we see that pain is taken much, much more seriously. They kind of couple that with research that was done that people didn't really focus. It was research that was misused and misquoted, I guess is the quickest way to say that. And also people's relationships to their doctors started changing as well. So he kind of lays all that foundation out before kind of diving into the opioid addiction. Primarily he focuses on Ohio, but he also touches on use on the West Coast as well as pill mills down in Florida. So really kind of the main focus of the book is on Oxy and how people would get strung out on Oxy. Then as it became more and more difficult to get a hold of it, the other half of the book is really him explaining how heroin that was grown in one specific region in Mexico spread throughout the United States in a way that was different than any other drug epidemic, and how that, coupled with the overprescription of OxyContin, led to just a epidemic of deaths. So it was a really in-depth book. I actually really like the way that he took kind of those twin paths, focusing on not only Oxy but also on heroin, and how that led to certain towns and certain regions is really being crushed by not only deaths but also the increase in crime that kind of came with people getting addicted. So I would highly recommend it. If I had nitpicks about it, they're pretty minor. I think it's a little bit too long. I think there are some things he could have cut. I will say that the book goes relatively quickly. It's cut into short chapters and it bounces around. But because it bounces around, sometimes it's difficult to keep a track of who certain people are in the country, because again, he kind of spans the entire country. He's down in Florida, he's in Ohio, he's in Oregon, he's in Mexico for parts of the book. So those were a couple things that were understandable, but also sometimes difficult to kind of keep your head straight as far as where we were. I guess the other thing that I kind of didn't like as much, or I felt like he could have put more time in the book towards it, he kind of glancingly talks about kind of how the demographics of the people who were addicted kind of changed the way that people were focused on incarceration versus treatment and things like that. He kind of touches on it, but he kind of does it in kind of a really quick manner without giving it too much depth of thought. I felt like some of his points were kind of undercut by when he talked about just the size and scope of the pandemic, if you want to call it a pandemic, the epidemic increase in kind of these crimes, where you really couldn't realistically have a incarceration solution just because there weren't enough prison beds. So the idea of having to do something different kind of increased, I think, just out of that alone. But those were relatively minor. the amount of research and stuff that went into this is pretty impressive. The amount that he got people to talk was pretty impressive. I think he does a good job of showing sympathy or empathy to almost every group of people that he kind of comes across. He shows kind of empathy and sympathy with people who are kind of caught up in their addiction, as well as showing empathy and kind of sympathetic to the people who were in Mexico, many of whom were, he kind of talks about in the book, this is a very rural region of Mexico where people are coming from. There's just not a lot of economic opportunities for them. So they're literally farm boys off the farm who come up to America, sell the heroin, and then come back down using that money to kind of further their lives. So I thought that was all really well done and really interesting. I guess the one downside, it would have been nice to have really gotten more from the pharmaceutical side of things. Purdue Pharmaceutical, the company that makes OxyContin, they are kind of absent from the book. He tries to reach out to them. He kind of, in the book, he publishes their response to his attempts to reach out and get them on record. And it's very much a PR statement. And I'm sure there's a million and one reasons for that, and I'm sure there's nothing really he could have done about it. But because they play such a large part in the book, and I think that's kind of the one question for me is how culpable are Purdue in all this as far as that is concerned. I think he gives kind of another quibble. He doesn't really pass a lot of moral judgments. The people who are running the pill mills, which are, I should describe what the pill mill is, but it's basically a doctor who is able to write prescriptions, but instead of actually actively trying to treat the person and their condition, is giving kind of these crushing amounts of painkillers that become addictive, instead of trying to treat that person and figure out how we can get them off the painkiller. They would just crank out these prescriptions, literally to the point where they would see people for 2 minutes, write them a prescription, and send them on their way, and they would see thousands of people. And he kind of goes over the rise in pain management clinics, and how those work to impact and spread and make this situation a lot worse. So if you're interested at all in the opioid epidemic and want to kind of get a foundational knowledge of it, I think this is an excellent book. I would recommend this to pretty much anybody who has that as their goal. I think you could give this to someone in high school, someone in college, and I think it would be a good book for them to check out. So I do highly recommend Dreamland. Like I said, I think it was really, really well researched, well written, and the quibbles I had with it were kind of few and far between. So that's Dreamland. Next time I'm going to be reading Big Guns by Steve Israel. As always, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll have my Twitter link in the comment below if you want to check that out. So until next time, bye.